Good afternoon or evening, good morning. This is my name is Andy Schweitzer. I've been wood turning probably a little bit more aggressively or more commonly for probably 10 years. I would say maybe another 3 or 4 years before that, just sort of, had a lathe, had a really underperforming lathe. I never had as sharp a tool. I didn't know anything. So and I joined the Nina Club, and I've been involved there quite a bit. And then I moved up here, and because of schedules, I couldn't ever get here on this weekend. But then things have cleared up a little bit for the last few years, and so I try to get over here for this club as well. So I try to do a demonstration for them once a year, and so I had mentioned this is what I did for them, and maybe people here would be interested as well. Other than that, I'm a science teacher in the valley, so I do talk all day long like this, demonstrating. Something like this is kind of what I do most of the day. I'm a science person instead of wood. So either way, so my sort of interest in this is this idea of Yorkshire grit. What is it? How does it work? In case you didn't get the news, I think was it Easy Tool just bought Yorkshire grit, so now that's going to be it's made in the United States. Is it a fad? What is it? How do I use it? Is it worth it? So I'm just going to walk through sort of how we go about using this material, and for me, wood turning obviously isn't a very cheap hobby. There are things that cost money. So to me, I ask myself, do I want to use this product, and is it beneficial for me as a wood turner based on what I'm doing? I am a utilitarian woodworker. I would like to make something that I can physically use. Like I brought a stool in today. I make wooden bowls. I don't make typically wooden bowls with the really shiny, polishy stuff on them because I want to be able to put food in a bowl and use a bowl. And after just a short period of time, that bowl is just going to turn into more of a satin type finish, anyways. So I am a utilitarian guy. I don't necessarily like that as much just to put something on a shelf and look at it. I want to use it. So again, with that being in mind, is this abrasive paste or abrasive sanding something that I'm interested in? So I bought some a while back, and I've used a jar of it, and I bought several different types. I got Axe, for example, is one. I got Pita True Grit is another one, and I got Yorkshire Grit, which isn't the one that I'm kind of using today. And if you look at them, they're kind of similar. I don't know that to a layman's eye you could tell the difference between these products. But so today what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take basically a bowl that is now I would say that this bowl here, I'm gonna throw this bowl away when I get home. All right. I did not pick a nice bowl. It's got some cracks in it. It's got some little it looks like it's got some rotting in it. So this bowl is gonna go in the garbage can, or I should say in the fire pit on the when I get home. So this demonstration isn't necessarily for to see how nice I can make something, sand something like this necessarily. It's more likely just to say, okay, what's it look like? How does it work? Is this something that I want to consider investing in, or maybe I want to just go a different way, right? So either way, so let's start talking about how we start from this point. When I talk about friction sanding or abrasive sanding, one of the things that I sort of deal with first, the simplest type of sort of abrasive sanding to me is just water. And so this is sort of a abrasive sanding, maybe some sort of a little bit in finishing. This is a huge rat's nest of information. And to be honest, anybody that says they're an expert at finishes, I'd be a little bit concerned. It just seems like, if someone says they have the number one way to dry a wood bowl blanks, because there are so many ways, so many variables, so many just things, and it seems to me like drying wood, you get your own way and you stick with it. Finishing is very similar. If you find what works for you on as a finishing, you just sort of stick with it. Well, why don't you try this? But this worked for me, so I just stay with it. And for me, like wipe on poly is a pretty common thing that I typically use. But either way, so I have dabbled into this area of friction polishing. So
Either way, so let's start with how I go about doing friction polishing. So for me, now for the abrasiveness for the Yorkshire grit, they want this sanded to about a 120, 240 ish, right around there. So they want you to sand with with your normal sanding techniques up to about 240, and that's when you start using the abrasive paste. One of the benefits of using the abrasive paste is not having sawdust, you know, flying around.
I am like many wood turners. You get to if you're a young wood turner, maybe you don't even worry about it. You just breathe it. You know, you see people around and they do things their own way. I often when people are at my house, I ask them if they want hearing protection, and when they say yes, I think their intelligence level has just gone up a few notches because I mean your body is important, in your lungs and your hearing and your eyes are all pretty important. So I got this here now. From this point here, I'm going to show how I would wet sand this because we don't want a ton, although we do have air suction here. I'm going to show my first initial sort of abrasive sanding, which would be with water. Now, when I do abrasive sanding, I use, um, I'll start out with maybe like a 180. I like the Abernit when I'm doing abrasive sanding. I keep a water jug by my lathe all the time. It's fairly damaged, as you can see. So I'm gonna start with this, and we'll just do a quick little sand up to 240-ish. And I would say that depending on how good of a wood turner you are, how smooth you can get this thing right off your tool, really makes a big difference in how much sanding you have to do. And it's almost not fair that if you're a young wood turner, you end up doing more sanding. You know, it's like, I'm just, and if you're a good wood turner or you're a more experienced wood turner, you might have the skills to literally that last final cut, get this thing to where it's about 120 or maybe even nicer right off the tool. Um, but either way, so what I do for mine is I sand with let's say this is about a 180 here. I'll jump up to a 240. I'll get this thing just about ready to use the Yorkshire grit. Now with this thing here, um, I sometimes will put a piece of cardboard down, put a maybe a board down because it's gonna get some water on it. I typically not that worried about the water on my lathe because there's sawdust everywhere. You know, if you've been wood turning, it's covered with sawdust, and at that point, it's not that big of a deal. But so I can stop it, I can start, I can spray it like this. I'm also not too worried about the water left behind because the friction heat just takes the water right out. So I like the Abernit because it's easily cleaned out. You know, what I mean, I can use it. The worst part about using a friction sanding on your sandpaper is it gums up your sandpaper. And this Abernit is anything but cheap. You know, I buy it by the roll, and you can whip through this stuff really fast. But you can see that at this point, if you're sanding, it starts to get gummed up. I flip it around, and it's already starting to dry. And I like how quickly the water dries. And you can sand like this with any real solvent that you want, as long as it dries quickly. You don't want I should say, you don't want something to dry up immediately either. Like you could use let's say like an oil of some sort, like maybe a Danish oil. Um, if you're going to use Danish oil anyways, you could just sand it with Danish oil. Sometimes when I'm using a friction sand like this, I'm sure many of you've all been there where you had that one little mark that just won't come out no matter how much you sand it. That's where sometimes I move to maybe a water sand. I feel like the water sand, it uses the grit of the actual sawdust to give a nicer touch here. Nice little easy to sand. There's not a ton of dust. And if you're looking primarily to remove dust, then this Yorkshire grit might be much more valuable for you, and you might want to start at this point. I like this stuff because I'll spray through the back of it as I'm using it, just to kind of clean it up a little bit, and then I'm ready to go. This stuff is more expensive, and that's another thing. Again, depending on where you are in your financial world of wood turning and how much you have invested in this
expensive hobby that we have, then maybe it just doesn't matter to, financially what it costs. But at some point, none of us necessarily like wasting money, and so you might want to say, okay, well, I don't want to pay for this. This stuff is about $1 a foot. Okay, so maybe you want to go with something different. So like in my house, in my shop, I buy this stuff from the big box. And this is from Klingspor, which is wood turner's specialty. It's like a Christmas present. It's a box of chocolates. You just never know what you're gonna get, right? It's $35. You got a big box of just everything from Klingspor. And a guy pushed this to me. Guy is it Norm? He lives up a little north here in Crivets, and he said, "You should buy this." I'm like, "Okay." So I bought one. This was like 2 years ago, and I still have rolls of this stuff. You're not guaranteed to get everything you want, but if you got buddies coming over and they want, or whatever, you just use it like you could use it like it's toilet paper, right? You could even use it for toilet paper if you wanted to. So it doesn't matter. It depends what grit you prefer. So with that being said, okay, so this is 180 here. I'm going to jump up to a 240 just to kind of give myself a little bit more of this situation, and a little more here. And I like this. I crank up a little more speed on this thing typically. All right. I would say also I might just spray a certain spot on this thing and not necessarily spray the whole bowl when I friction sand. I also like to generate some heat. That's going to help get rid of this water that I'm spraying on it. So I might want to get a little bit more speed on it. I also like a sanding sponge. I almost never sand with my fingers like this. I don't know. I jam my fingers, and your fingers are constantly getting beat up on this hobby we have here. So if I can use a sanding sponge, I will. And it's starting to dry out. Let's jump to this side here.
And if you're doing a lot of bowls, you got to get a system down that really helps you get from point A to point B really as fast as you can. You don't necessarily want to be wasting your time sanding and doing a few other things. All right, so this thing is getting awfully close to being dry. I'm going to grab a fresh paper piece just to, I'll even grab something like this. Again, this stuff just tears off. It will last seconds. Just a little more dust. Sorry for the guys in front here. And there we go. But again, you literally can just take this stuff and, oh, it's got a little bit left on it. Doesn't matter. You just chuck it, right? All right, so here we go. And it's for a utilitarian woodworker like myself, I might just say this is good enough for me. I don't necessarily go too far beyond, 200, 220, maybe 320 would be a maximum for me as a utilitarian wood bowl turner. I just don't. I'm going to use this thing, and it's going to get dings. And I brought my stool in this morning. I was a little more careful, and I whacked it on the door as I was coming in. So it's going to get dinged. It's going to get nicks on it, and so on and so forth. So, all right. So now we got done here to about, about 240, 300. What's next? All right. So Yorkshire grit has some oils and waxes. It's got, honey, bee wax in it. They don't really come out and say exactly what's in it. Mineral oil. You got some abrasives. It looks, I think the main thing we have in here would be like a diatomaceous earth. Okay. And again, if you've never seen some of this stuff, you're welcome to come up and take a look at it afterwards or talk to a friend. Last weekend, I think one of the Rons tossed this to me. So this is a little, I don't recall a little pad he uses. So I don't know how I acquired this last month. So we use this just to kind of apply it. But because it has some oils in this thing, they recommend that you seal it first. Okay, so I was doing research for this, and I came up with some of the people recommended myelins. Okay. Again, for me, I don't always use a ton of sanding sealer, but this is going to seal this up. So I bought this. To me, everything I do in there, I guess, has some amount of cost to it. This stuff was unusually expensive. It was 38. I think it was about 38 bucks, high 30s. And I was a little surprised by how small the container was. I'm like, what the hell? Right? So I'm like, okay. I mean, sometimes you can use stuff and it lasts forever. But all right, so what is this stuff? This is a cellulose base material. So cellulose would be like paper or wood. So, but it's using a fast drying lacquer type solvent. And if again, someone here might be like, hey, lacquer, that's what I use for everything. Positives to lacquer, dries super fast. So just while we're sitting here, we're going to see this thing dry up and we're going to be able to use it. Negatives, it's got an awful smell to it. And of course, as I've gotten older, I'm more and more looking to get away from some of the fumes. I would take extra special caution not to be exposed to fumes, whether it means everything from not letting my bowls dry in my house, I'll leave them someplace else, to even not wanting to leave a rag that's wet sit on, on the floor. I would want maybe to have this stuff. I usually would use rubber gloves, and I would typically take and put the rag inside the rubber glove, and then I will sort of seal it inside the rubber glove as I throw it in the garbage can, or get rid of it. I don't want to leave it just sit like on the floor where maybe it might just vaporize. You smell it the next day too, for hours. Again, could talk all day about that sort of thing. All right, so while this thing dries, again, it's very fast drying. This stuff stinks. It's bad, but it smells bad. But I mean, I would say I might never buy this again. I'm never going to buy this again. Yeah, it's got a typical lacquer smell. It's thick. It's got a thickener in it. It's like thicker stuff. So not only is it expensive, it takes forever. It goes fast. I'm already down to like a third of it gone, and I barely even use this thing. If you're making 20 or 30 or more bowls, you're going to be buying jugs of this stuff. So I personally wouldn't give a high recommendation for this, not only for the smell, but also for just ease of use and cost. So for me, I'm more of a alcohol and shellac person. I would use a shellac filler. That's more what I would go with if I'm going with something. So for me, that's what I will do in the future and what I've done in the past. I got that just because people recommended it. Okay, and I think it is nice, but again, it's a teeter-totter type situation. What do you want to use it for? Is it worth it for you? Yeah. Yeah, even the mineral spirits, you're right. I mean, it doesn't have the bad smell, but just because you can't smell it doesn't mean it's not causing you problems. But the answer to that is no. No, I don't. I've just really started going more towards a water-based, finishes and trying to get away from oil entirely. But that's a whole conversation that we could have here. So either way, so this is now sealed. It doesn't really take long to get this to work. So now we're looking at our product for our abrasiveness on this thing. Now again, when I'm doing this type of product, if I'm doing 5, 10, 12 bowls in a row, I went to Menards and I bought a one of these guys. I'm always wearing a mask when I'm doing my shop pretty much. I got a suction right here, but this is a carbon filtered one where if you put this on, you will not smell this chemical, period. I have the nice, what Victor calls is the space suit where it goes over. Love that in the summertime. It keeps you cool, keeps all the dust out. It does. My filter will you'll still smell all the fumes. You'll smell black walnut. You'll smell everything. So it's good for dust, but it's not going to do me any good for the high volatile chemicals. But this was 35 bucks at Menards, and you can't smell anything. It's a little bit of a cheap version. I think next time I'll buy someone that doesn't like pop off at the slightest little movement. I have a regular canister one that I really like. It's dirty as hell, but it works, and it keeps working. So just for these chemicals here, and one time's not a big deal exposing to it.
but over and over and over again over the course of 5, 10, 20 years, it's just, I think our things are starting to show up that we probably shouldn't be exposing ourselves to these things. All right, so with that being said, first things first, as I have my Yorkshire grit, okay? How do we apply this stuff? What do we do? All right, so at this, I typically, when I do it in the past, have just used a cotton t-shirt. I'm always wearing cotton t-shirts. They get old. I cut them up into little squares, and I got a couple of them sitting here that I would use. And they're just throwaway. I have no problem using one. I'm not trying to extend the life of them at all. They always get thrown away. So first things first, I wouldn't turn on the lathe. I would just leave it stationary. And you grab yourself some of this paste, all right, and just start rubbing it on. You got to kind of take your time on this a little bit and rub it in a little bit. Now, I only do typically one coat of that sealer. I imagine a person could do 2 coats, but for me, I don't know, even if it was like more of like a shellac, I would probably feel more comfortable just really dousing it on there and using it more liberally. But like I said, that stuff's kind of expensive, the Mylans, and there's also a Mylans friction polish as well. All right, so here we go. We are, for the most part, we are now covered with this Yorkshire grit. I have used the axe. I cannot tell the difference. So this stuff is a little bit more expensive than the axe, and the axe is a little more expensive than the pitas. But I can't tell the difference. You might have a little bit different composition. I think the P is a little bit harder. This stuff is a little bit softer, okay? So with that being said, all we do at this point, take the same little rag, and we'll turn this on, and you just start sanding. Again, the main benefit here is there is no dust. Everything's kind of getting caught up in that paste. The paste, I'm sure as well, is also starting to itself with the sauce and is doing some abrasion. Some people will say that you can feel the breakdown of the material. At first, it feels kind of gritty, and then after a little bit of time, it just starts to feel smoother. Okay, whether that's in your head or if it's the real, I don't know. You can try it out. All right, so I now have this one. I might flip it to reverse and give it that way. I'm always a big fan of just sanding, especially getting it back different directions. Here we go. I typically don't do it much more than this. This is pretty much it. You can sit here for a little time if you want. I don't spend a ton of time, but I am also a utilitarian woodworker. So this is already, in my opinion, going beyond what I normally would do. If I want a bowl that I'm going to be using for, I don't know, like popcorn and pasta and different things, I'm already kind of beyond that point. So let's do the outside here quickly. I don't know that this stuff is super costly. I would say if you're just a sandpaper person and you're buying sandpaper, if you're not trying to find cheap sandpaper, then you're probably paying a pretty good price for sandpaper. And with that being said, the cost of this paste probably isn't that expensive if you're looking at just doing a cost analysis. All right, there we go. One more little guy on the outside here, and then we'll be taking it off. All right, so there we go. This bowl is not a nice bowl. It is got some holes in it. Just caught my fingernail on a little crack. So it is just kind of something that we'll be getting rid of soon. All right, so here we go. So now it's off. All right, I can take this stuff off of here. And what I use for this is I just use a cloth rag. And it's got some, definitely I got some on my hands too, so I'd be a little bit more leer. I think I'll use a little more today than I normally would use. And at this point, I usually use a white one so I can see it. And you're just going to take it off. And again, there are some people that would say they don't want to use it because of the waxes. There are some people that say that this is not a finish, it's an abrasive, but it has some wax in it. Could you just leave it like this? And the answer is you probably could. depending on what you're going to use it for. You might want at that point oil it with some some mineral oil or something like that, or whatever. You could just leave it like that. For the most part, a person is just going to keep doing this until they see there's no more on the rag.
I find it a little bit hard to believe that all of it's coming off. It's got to be, if you looked up close, you've got to see this stuff just jammed in all the pores of this wood. But this is what they're advertising as far as how you want to do this. So let's grab ourselves a clean rag and just make sure we got everything off. And I think I'm pretty close as far as from a human visual standpoint. I can't see that there's a whole lot more left here. And my rag is empty on the first run, and I would say it's got a little bit more on the back side, so I'll flip it over and do one more little run here. All right, so this is what's called the Yorkshire grit. It's the more aggressive stuff here. I don't know if people pass things around or not, but okay, take it around, take a look at it, pass it around. If you've never seen it before, open it up, take a look at it. Okay, they now sell a microfine. I don't know what this is. I just found out about this last summer when a buddy of mine was like, "Hey, you ever try the microfine?" I'm like, "Never heard of it." So of course I had to buy it, right? So I have some, and I looked online, and most of the places are just going to do it with this. This stuff it's hard. I think it's a little harder to tell if it does anything. But on things like acrylics and plastics and stuff, you can look online and watch videos. It works really well. So I'm going to run through one little sanding on this stuff, and because this is what I did on the other one, and then I'll pass around the one that I have finished, and we'll take a look at it. Again, just rub a little bit on here, and this is going to get that next sort of maybe next level of shine that you might be looking for. It's hard to find numbers, and someone will ask, what number sandpaper is this sanding to? Like, what's the level? And I've seen people talk about 1200 to 2000. I don't know. I mean, it really depends on how well you buff it and whatever. So I don't know. So at this point, here we go. I've also used this stuff on my polyurethane. If I have a poly that's not, I want to sand and buff up a little bit, this stuff does work nice just on a straight polyurethane. All right, so there we go. Doesn't take super long. I'll flip it over and just sort of take out some of the stuff. I'll grab a brush rag here. Let me get out of here. That's good enough, I guess. Here we go. All right, so this is two sort of sandings. One would be your grit, that's the typical grit, and then you have the microfine. The last thing I would do is next thing I would do is I put some poly on here, and I would do a couple coats of poly, and then I would polish it. So what I did was I have a bowl here that I already did this with that I'm going to then polish it, and then you can pass that around and see, okay, how does that look to what I'm normally used to? Would this be as good or better, or is it something that I want to try? I'll pass this around just so you can see it, and then from there, should have my tool here somewhere. You can make your own decision. There are some people I've talked to who just will not do this purely because it's got wax, in it, and I don't want to use that. But this is just done pre-poly. Take a look, see what you think. Again, you can critique the wood turning, but it's just a crap piece of wood. Just look at, see, based on your skills, is it something that you would want to use? Okay. All right, so this was done a couple days ago. It already has the same treatment that's had, and all I'm going to do with this thing is polish it. The friction, people say, if you ask most wood turners about friction sanding, they would probably immediately move towards a friction polish, because that's what people use a lot for. And I just was going to wrap up sort of this type of demonstration with a typical friction polish. And there's a lot of different ways you can do this. The one that I sometimes like, and people push me towards on our just is Renaissance wax. Okay, so Renaissance wax is now I have poly on here. How do I get this thing to start shining a little bit? This Renaissance wax is something you want to use not that much of. It gets kind of hard, it dries. It's something that, again, the smell of turpentine just is god awful, all right? And so, not something I like to spend a lot of time around. But take a little bit of this stuff, grab a clean part of your rag, and we're going to toss this on here and rub it on very lightly. Do not need a lot of this. And you'll see as you're putting it on and start turning it, this thing will start to shine up a little bit. There's a lot of ways that you can go about shining your piece of work, whether it's a Beal buffing wheel. One bad thing about this stuff is I like to use it on the lathe. It gets spinning. You have to get some heat and some friction on this thing. Otherwise, it's not going to evaporate out. I put it in my basement, and it took about 2 weeks before I went down there and it wasn't smelling, and I felt like it kind of set up a little bit. So it does take a little bit of heat and friction to kind of get this thing really to where you hand it, if you were to give it to somebody, let's say someone bought a bowl from you on Etsy and you mailed them a bowl and you just hand wiped this stuff on here, they would be disappointed when they got this because it's going to smell bad, right? For a few weeks, not to drive you out of your kitchen. All right, so it's on there, and the last thing I did was just flip this thing on, and we're going to see this thing just start to kind of really start to get a little bit more of a shine on it. All right. And again, it really depends on what you're looking for. The axe is about low 30s dollars wise. The pita was more in the 20s, high 20s, but it's a smaller container. The Mylands was about 38 bucks. So they got your price point. See what you'll pay for. And here we go. Any questions on this stuff here as we're going along here? Yeah. Yep. I'm guessing so. I never heard of it. A couple people last time were saying it's probably something very similar. I mean, I don't think anybody's recreating the wheel at this point. You know, I mean, we got occasionally a little tweak on a different product of some sort, but I mean, is the Yorkshire grit just a bunch of marketing? I'm assuming a lot of it is. You know, they just sold out to Easy Tools, and I think a lot of it just, if they called, it's just got a unique name, and they've done a good job promoting it. So, other than that, that's pretty much where I was at. Any other questions on some of the friction bones? Yeah. The white stuff I'll pass around as well. I mean, at this point, it looks to me like you can obviously see diatomaceous earth in here. So this is also Yorkshire grit. It's called abrasive paste microfine. It's called Yorkshire grit, which is the Hampshire sheen stuff. I think is the same thing. I think. Pass around, take a look, and then also, if you would like to take a look at the Renaissance wax, you can take a look at that as well. It's something that people recommend. How durable is the finish? You're referring to the polyurethane, or you're referring to the polish? Yeah. How durable is it? So the main finish on there would be the wipe on poly, and I think wipe on poly is probably middle of the road. Can you find stuff that's harder? Like maybe a lacquer would be harder, absolutely, or an epoxy might be harder.
but it is easy to apply, and I would call it with daily use. I have bowls that I use regularly, weekly, that are 4, 5, 6, 7 years old. That to me, as long as you don't submerge them and put them in the dishwasher, then you're going to be good to go. I haven't had to I left some rotting fruit in a bowl once, and that caused the bowl to stain, and then I had to refinish it. Other than that, I have not had to refinish a bowl. So yeah,
It's birch. Yep, they're both birch. It is an oil finish, so that's got some oils in it, so it's gonna make it pop a little bit. I do not know. It was white. It was white on the outside. It was in my brother's yard, and I got a lot of it. So I would say that speed-wise, I typically come close to max if I lay it out on speed, just for generating some heat. And that way, whatever you're comfortable with, obviously. If you go a little slower, you might take a little more time. Yorkshire. Yep. That's the part that sometimes you question. You're like, okay, will this stay on there? And I haven't. Yeah, or is it not going to stick well, or what's going to happen to it? And again, I wouldn't say I have any long-term information on that. Where all of a sudden, 3 years later, I have this bowl that I use white else, and it's falling up. It's changing. I don't know about that. So that's something where if you're selling a $600 bowl, maybe you don't want to do this. You want to stick with a tried and true, you know. So that's kind of like, if you're going to get a knee replacement, you don't want something maybe that's fresh off the laboratory table. You want something that's been used for a while, right? Yeah, I mean, you want something that's works all the time, and we know how it responds. This stuff, I don't know. It's kind of new, but give it a try. And I've only used it on bowls. I haven't used it maybe on spindles or other things of this nature. So, any other questions or thoughts? Otherwise, short little demonstration on waxing. Yeah. Throwing that bowl away? You could have it. It's got a crack in it, so it'd be finished. You'd be sealing that crack up a little bit, and nice little bowl though. All right. Again, my name's Andy. Good to see you guys. If you need anything else, questions, let me know as we wrap things up here. And nice helping out.